Welcome to Independent Voice, where integrity matters, voices are free, and transparency leads the conversation. In a world flooded with noise, we bring you fearless analysis, deep dives into governance, and topics that matter to citizens, not just the powerful. Today's episode uncovers the meaning behind the phrase, "It's my turn to eat," and why it resonates far beyond borders, right into the heart of Ethiopia's present and future. You're in the right place if you care about justice, accountability, and building a better society. When noise drowns out the truth, we break through, offering fearless analysis, meaningful coverage of governance, and stories that put citizens first. You're in the right place if you believe in justice, demand accountability, and dream of a better society. The phrase, "It's my turn to eat," popularized in Kenya through Michela Wrong's exposé of whistleblower John Githongo, now echoes powerfully through Ethiopia's corridors of power. Once a phrase denoting greed among elites, it has evolved into a cultural mirror, reflecting Ethiopia's deeper issues with governance, corruption, and identity politics. From parliament buildings to rural communities, the sentiment remains the same. Public office is perceived not as a chance to serve, but as a long-awaited entitlement, a turn to eat. Critics argue that this mentality perpetuates a corruption, exclusion, and fragmentation cycle. What are the major concepts explored in the book? To learn so much more about the book's profound depth, we recommend that you read it. The heart of the book is an exposé of systemic corruption. Wrong vividly documents how public resources were routinely siphoned off through fraudulent contracts and shell companies, exposing a political system where embezzlement and cronyism had become normalized. Githongo's findings highlight the fragility of state institutions in the face of vested political interests and demonstrate how corruption erodes not only financial integrity, but also democratic legitimacy and public trust. Githongo's story is a case study of the personal cost of integrity. As a whistleblower, he faced immense pressure, alienation, and threats to his safety. The book underscores the difficulty confronting entrenched power structures and the lack of institutional protection for those who dare to speak out. Yet, it also elevates whistleblowers as essential actors in the fight for transparency and reform. One of the book's most powerful themes is the manipulation of ethnic identity for political gain. Wrong explores how Kenya's elite co-opted ethnic narratives to create a patronage system where access to power and resources is distributed along tribal lines. This zero-sum logic fosters exclusion, resentment, and, at times, violence. It also complicates anti-corruption efforts, as challenges to power are often framed as betrayals of ethnic solidarity rather than demands for justice. Despite its grim revelations, It's My Turn to Eat is not a story of despair, it is a story of resistance. Githongo's courage offers a glimpse into the possibility of ethical governance in Africa. The book concludes with a call to action, an insistence that reform is necessary and achievable when driven by courageous individuals and an informed public. Returning to the metaphor of Michela Wrong's "It's My Turn to Eat," we can see a riveting and courageous work of investigative journalism that lays bare the inner workings of Kenya's political machinery. Centered on the real-life experiences of John Githongo, a journalist turned anti-corruption czar, the book is a profile of one man's principled stand against corruption and a broader commentary on the challenges facing governance in post-colonial Africa. During Mwai Kibaki's presidency, the book traces Githongo's journey from a trusted insider within the administration to a disillusioned whistleblower forced into exile after uncovering the Anglo leasing scandal, a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme implicating high-level officials. Through meticulous research and intimate narrative, Wrong illustrates the deeply entrenched corruption in the Kenyan political system and how loyalty, patronage, and ethnic alliances often supersede the rule of law and ethical governance. Githongo's journey reminds readers that meaningful change often comes at a personal cost, but standing up for truth remains vital to public service. The book underscores that democratic institutions are vulnerable to decay without independent oversight and legal enforcement. Accountability is the cornerstone of public trust. Readers gain insight into the institutional and cultural obstacles to reform in developing democracies, knowledge essential for designing effective anti-corruption strategies. It's My Turn to Eat is more than a compelling biography or a Kenyan political drama. It is a universal reflection on power, loyalty, justice, and the difficult path toward reform. It resonates well beyond Kenya's borders and offers valuable lessons to any society grappling with the intersection of governance, identity, and corruption. The message behind the title, It's My Turn to Eat, is as provocative as it is revealing. It encapsulates a culturally familiar and politically destructive mentality in Kenya and much of Africa. The phrase is not just about corruption in the narrow sense of illegal activity. It represents a broader worldview that distorts the purpose of public office. At its core, the title underscores a pervasive sense of entitlement among political elites. Public office is viewed less as a platform for service and more as a gateway to personal enrichment. This belief fuels a culture in which state resources are treated as spoils of power rather than as public trust. Rather than seeing themselves as stewards, leaders often act as beneficiaries of a system designed to reward loyalty and silence dissent. This entitlement mentality reinforces corrupt practices and sidelines the values of meritocracy, transparency, and equity. The phrase symbolizes a self-perpetuating cycle where corruption becomes both a precedent and a justification. Once one group eats, the expectation is that others will get their turn, often with the tacit understanding that corruption will be tolerated if the spoils are shared. This normalization of misconduct creates a system devoid of accountability. Political transitions become less about reform and more about redistribution of access to wealth, deepening inequality, and undermining institutional credibility. The phrase reflects deep frustration and loss of faith in leadership for ordinary citizens. As politicians prioritize personal or ethnic interests over public welfare, citizens are left disillusioned and disengaged. The expectation that every new administration will repeat the misdeeds of the last corrodes civic morale and weakens democratic participation. It fuels apathy, resentment, and, in some cases, unrest. Ultimately, the title, It's My Turn to Eat, reflects individual greed and an indictment of systemic failure. It challenges readers and policymakers to confront the underlying political, cultural, and institutional dynamics that allow corruption to thrive. It urges societies to reimagine leadership as a calling to serve, not a license to consume. Relevance across Africa, a shared metaphor for reform. The message behind It's My Turn to Eat resonates far beyond Kenya's borders. It captures a mindset and governance pattern familiar across many African countries, where politics is frequently equated with access to resources and power, is seen as a means for self-advancement rather than public stewardship. This metaphor has relevance for nations grappling with corruption, inequality, and exclusion. The phrase can act as a rallying cry for civil society organizations across the continent. It encapsulates citizens' frustrations and can be used to mobilize movements that demand ethical governance, transparency, and reform. It provides a clear and relatable entry point for advocacy campaigns aimed at both national and local leadership. Grassroots organizations, youth movements, and marginalized communities can use this message to build solidarity across ethnic, class, and regional lines. By recognizing a shared struggle against corrupt systems, diverse constituencies can work together to demand accountability and inclusive governance. The metaphor underscores the urgency of legal and structural reforms. These include implementing stronger anti-corruption laws, creating independent oversight institutions, and curbing patronage politics. Governments that are serious about change can adopt the message to demonstrate a commitment to breaking cycles of abuse. Civic education initiatives can draw on the message to teach citizens about their rights and the importance of holding leaders accountable. Embedding these lessons into school curricula, media programs, and community dialogue can foster a new generation of ethically conscious citizens. The metaphor can also be a tool for cultural introspection, challenging deeply held norms that equate leadership with privilege rather than service. It invites communities and leaders alike to reflect on the moral standards they uphold and the kind of future they wish to build. Essentially, "It's my turn to eat" has become more than a Kenyan phrase. It has emerged as a Pan-African metaphor that captures the dysfunction of governance systems and the collective aspiration for reform. By reframing leadership as a duty rather than an entitlement, African societies can begin to chart a path toward more just, equitable, and accountable governance. Ethiopia, a mirror of the metaphor. The message embedded in "It's my turn to eat" finds a poignant echo in Ethiopia's contemporary political landscape, where questions of governance, corruption, and ethnic-based entitlement remain deeply entrenched. In many ways, Ethiopia exemplifies the dangers of transactional politics and ethnically framed power sharing, where leadership roles are often perceived not as opportunities to serve but as chances to extract. A system stretched thin. Decades of educational expansion have seen school enrollments rise and university campuses multiply, but quantity has not translated to the desperately needed quality. Students graduate lacking critical thinking, civic knowledge, and ethical grounding. The educational system lacks the depth to cultivate or encourage discussion of rights and responsibilities, or raise a generation that sees the role of the citizenry from the perspective of an educated mind. Instead, it merely goes through the motions to pass exams and obtain proof of completion without the ability to translate much of the lessons into personal growth or civic responsibility and obligation. Universities envisioned as drivers of change have often become passive institutions, constrained by limited resources, creating a loss of motivation and political interference. Many scholars are discouraged from touching politically sensitive topics, especially ethnic conflict and governance. Given the tumultuous nature of ethnic division, who wouldn't? This failure to cultivate an informed, engaged citizenry has allowed corruption, bribery, and rigid tendencies to coin one's belief in the pursuit of changing the young mind, which is far beyond disheartening and departs from the country's historically strong nationalist mindset. Inside the bureaucracy, dedication and dysfunction. Let's examine the bureaucratic system for a sneak peek at dedication versus dysfunction. Ethiopia's public administration is paradoxical. On one hand, committed civil servants strive to serve even in challenging environments. On the other, systemic dysfunction saps their efforts. The bureaucracy is plagued by red tape, inefficient interagency coordination, and political interest group interference. People have described the intergovernmental processes as slow and cumbersome. Such inefficiencies frustrate service providers and recipients and create fertile ground for corruption. Bribes often become the currency for speeding up processes, bypassing paperwork, or securing government jobs. The higher the position or level of autonomy, the more strategic corruption becomes. Access to procurement contracts, land permits, and foreign aid disbursements often depends on political loyalty, leading many to equate public office with opportunity, not responsibility. This line of thinking begs to examine the history and foundation of Ethiopia's public administration infrastructure. Like many nations navigating rapid political change, Ethiopia has faced enduring challenges with corruption at various levels of government. From procurement fraud to administrative favoritism, the abuse of public office for personal or political gain has hindered public sector effectiveness. The phrase "it's my turn to eat" aptly captures the sense that governance in Ethiopia can sometimes become a gateway to accumulation rather than nation building, leaving citizens disillusioned and underserved. Ethnic federalism and the political marketplace. The 1995 Constitution introduced ethnic federalism, intending to empower marginalized communities. While it achieved some decentralization and cultural recognition, it also entrenched ethnic divisions. Ethiopia's federal system, structured along ethnic lines, has empowered identity groups and intensified competition over state resources. As political power often aligns with ethnic affiliation, the tendency for ethnic-based elites to prioritize their group's interests becomes strong. This fuels perceptions of favoritism and entitlement, where each group awaits its turn to dominate key institutions or benefit from national development. This cycle entrenches division and undermines a unified national identity. Power seems to be often negotiated along ethnic lines. Political actors are seen as representatives of their groups rather than stewards of the whole nation. When a group comes to power, it is viewed as their turn to eat. When power shifts, so do the beneficiaries. This cycle fuels resentment and undermines national unity. Although ethnic federalism comes with complexity, it has been viewed as a system that has the potential to derail modern economic growth, and one that requires an intentional commitment to keeping national interests at the forefront. This is not to say that ethnicity is the issue. It is how it is exploited that makes it a receipt for complex and ongoing issues. Power holders operate with impunity without checks and balances, and a futuristic strategy with national interest over a given demography. Such a phenomenon has an overarching impact. Despite double-digit growth in past decades, Ethiopia remains in the quest to sustain economic development. The ongoing and compounded internal issues, be it political, economic, gender, or religious, seem to exhaust the system as a whole and the wellness of everyday citizens. In this context, bribery is often rationalized as the survival of the fetus. There is an old saying that goes, "One that does not take advantage while in power cries when no longer in power." It's like there is a need to benefit as much as possible regardless of the impact of the fallout, because there seems to be mistrust of the system. It is the false entitlement premised on the notion that those in power previously have done it, so it is my turn, our turn to eat. Political favoritism in economic planning has also deepened inequality. Regions aligned with the ruling coalition often have the appearance to receive more favorable opportunities. Others are left behind, reinforcing that political power is the only path to personal or group gain. Let's step into the culture and corrosion of ethical leadership. For generations, Ethiopians have grown up witnessing leaders who enrich themselves while public services and national interests crumble. Over time, this has created a dangerous moral numbness. Bribery becomes an expectation. Nepotism becomes a tradition. Public cynicism becomes the norm. Still, a quiet revolution is growing. Religious institutions, journalists, artists, and youth leaders are beginning to question the normalization of corruption. Movements are emerging that emphasize values of humility, responsibility, and justice. The most significant paradigm shift Ethiopia needs is rebirthing the culture of integrity and loyalty to the national interest and a humanitarian. Upholding human dignity must be given the utmost priority and instilled in the mind of every citizen. Decades of political unrest, governance instability, and broken reform promises have led to widespread public cynicism. Many Ethiopians feel excluded from meaningful participation in governance, perceiving that political elites serve themselves or their ethnic constituents rather than the broader population. The persistence of this belief further erodes civic trust, weakens institutions, and increases the risk of social unrest. In sum, its "my turn to eat's" metaphor is a mirror reflecting Ethiopia's internal challenges and a wake-up call. It highlights the urgent need for a new model of leadership rooted in service, fairness, and shared national purpose. Confronting this mindset is essential to breaking cycles of corruption and division, and building an inclusive political culture that prioritizes collective well-being over narrow interests. The phrase, "it is my turn to eat," echoes far beyond the personal. it is a powerful metaphor for how power, privilege, and access to resources have long been distributed in Ethiopia's political landscape. In a nation characterized by its deep ethnic diversity, this expression encapsulates a system where political ascendancy is often viewed not as a mandate to serve, but as an opportunity to extract. As different ethnic groups rise to political prominence, the notion of eating becomes synonymous with reaping the benefits of state power, economic opportunity, political leverage, and symbolic representation, often at the expense of those relegated to the margins. This turn-taking narrative has fueled cycles of resentment, exclusion, and at times violence. In Ethiopia, the struggle over who gets to eat is tightly interwoven with the federal structure built along ethnic lines. Ethnic federalism, while intended to empower groups and preserve cultural autonomy, has also entrenched identity politics, making state resources and political representation matters of ethnic entitlement. When one group gains dominance, others feel starved, literally and metaphorically. The phrase thus reveals the transactional and zero-sum nature of governance in this context. It speaks to the hunger, not just for food or wealth, but for recognition, autonomy, and the right to shape national destiny. And in a country where history is often told through the lens of who was allowed to eat and who was kept waiting, this turn has become both a hope and a threat. The title, "It Is My Turn to Eat," is a piercing metaphor for the cyclical and often predatory nature of power in Ethiopia's contemporary landscape. It foretells a pattern where political transitions are less about reform and more about repositioning, one group stepping into the corridors of power not to dismantle systems of inequality, but to inherit and exploit them. In today's Ethiopia, this metaphor has become a grim prophecy. As each ethnic or political faction ascends, it claims its turn to access state resources, economic privileges, and institutional dominance, often sidelining the broader ideals of national unity, justice, or equity. The result is a deepening fragmentation of society where power is seen not as a means to serve all, but as a limited resource to be consumed before it is taken away. Social cohesion suffers under the weight of this zero-sum logic, and economic development becomes uneven, hostage to political favoritism. Thus, the title captures a past mode of governance and warns of a present and future Ethiopia trapped in a dangerous loop of entitlement, exclusion, and instability. The consequences of this mentality are increasingly evident in Ethiopia's political instability, economic discontent, and fraying social fabric. The sense of exclusion felt by groups not currently in power fuels mistrust, grievances, and, at times, open conflict. There is an undercurrent that paints a notion of uneven governance in terms of development, and politicized regions favored by the ruling group receive investment and attention while others languish in neglect. Meritocracy is weakened as appointments and opportunities become tied to loyalty or ethnic affiliation rather than competence. On a broader scale, the eating mindset corrodes democratic institutions because power is not seen as something to be shared or checked, but seized and held onto at all costs. In this way, "It is my turn to eat" is more than a phrase. It is a warning about a country at risk of consuming itself from within, unless a new vision of inclusive and accountable leadership takes root. Ethiopia faces complex, interrelated challenges that hinder effective governance, fuel corruption, and weaken political accountability. These issues are deeply intertwined with the themes captured by the metaphor, "It's my turn to eat," a phrase that symbolizes the perception of power as a tool for personal or group enrichment rather than public service. This metaphor continues to resonate in Ethiopia's political, social, and economic landscape, where leadership often becomes a conduit for access to state resources rather than a platform for inclusive development. The following key factors illustrate how these dynamics manifest in present-day Ethiopia. Let's look at education, particularly the lack of civic education. Many of the Ethiopian population remain unaware of their civic rights and responsibilities. This knowledge gap limits meaningful public engagement and weakens the collective demand for transparency, justice, and accountability. Without an informed citizenry, democratic processes remain superficial, allowing cycles of impunity to persist. This observation is not meant to diminish the passion, sacrifices, and dedication of individuals who have long championed democratic ideals, but to highlight the need for a broader, intentional paradigm shift across society. A change in mindset is essential, one that encourages strategic, informed civic participation and fosters a culture of holding leaders accountable while embracing personal responsibility. Significantly, this shift must also place clear responsibility on public officials to consistently evaluate the motivations behind their decisions and actions, ensuring that their leadership serves the interests of the many, not the privileged few. While Ethiopia has made commendable progress in expanding access to education over the past few decades, the quality of education remains uneven and, in many regions, critically insufficient. This disparity poses a significant barrier to developing a well-informed and civically engaged population. Inadequate learning outcomes at both primary and secondary levels limit students' ability to develop critical thinking skills, understand governance structures, engage with national policy debates, or advocate for their rights. As a result, the foundational goal of education, to prepare individuals not only for employment, but also for meaningful participation in society, is only partially realized. A critical yet often overlooked dimension of this challenge lies in the role of higher education institutions. Universities and colleges are uniquely positioned to foster civic responsibility, ethical leadership, and analytical thinking. However, many institutions of higher learning in Ethiopia have fallen short of this potential. Curricula often emphasize routine memorization and technical training over critical inquiry, interdisciplinary learning, and civic education. This narrow academic focus leaves graduates ill-equipped to challenge systemic issues such as corruption, social inequality, and poor governance. Furthermore, universities are responsible for serving as thought leaders within society, spaces where public policy is debated, social accountability is promoted, and ethical leadership is cultivated. However, these institutions often operate in politically constrained environments that discourage open dialogue and limit academic freedom. Students and faculty may feel discouraged from critically engaging with political or social issues in such settings, weakening the accountability and civic engagement culture. To address this, a concerted effort must be made to reform and revitalize educational content and pedagogy at all levels. Academic institutions must go beyond transmitting knowledge and instill integrity, public service, and active citizenship values. Integrating civic education, ethics, and leadership training into university curricula can equip graduates with the tools to become agents of positive change in the public and private sectors. In general, improving the quality of education, specifically universities' role in shaping the nation's civic consciousness, is essential for building a democratic Ethiopia rooted in accountability, equity, and inclusive governance. Education must not only prepare students to earn a living, but also empower them to take an active role in shaping the future of their country. Let's shift gears to the public administration system. Ethiopia's public administration system is central to delivering essential services, maintaining law and order, and implementing national development goals. Over the years, commendable efforts have been made to improve administrative capacity and modernize state institutions. Investments in digitization, civil service reform, and decentralization demonstrate a recognition of the need to make governance more responsive, transparent, and citizen-centered. However, despite these efforts, inefficiencies and structural weaknesses continue to undermine the effectiveness of the public administration system. Excessive bureaucracy, redundant procedures, and fragmented coordination among institutions often result in delays, inconsistencies, and inaccessibility. Citizens, particularly those in remote or underserved regions, frequently encounter difficulty navigating government processes, whether for obtaining identification documents, accessing land titles, or securing business permits. These bureaucratic hurdles discourage public participation, reduce the state's legitimacy, and foster frustration toward government institutions. The administrative framework is often characterized by rigid hierarchies and outdated processes, giving off inefficiency and bureaucracy. While some reforms have aimed to simplify service delivery and improve public sector efficiency, implementation has been uneven. Civil servants often lack the tools, training, or motivation to deliver services effectively. Furthermore, coordination between federal, regional, and local levels of government remains inconsistent, leading to duplication of efforts or gaps in service provision. These inefficiencies diminish citizens' confidence in the state's ability to address their needs and uphold their rights. Corruption within public institutions remains a significant challenge. Despite anti-corruption rhetoric and periodic crackdowns, practices such as nepotism, bribery, cronyism, the practice of appointing friends and associates to positions of authority without regard to their qualifications, rent-seeking, a common practice of manipulating public policy or economic conditions as a strategy for increasing personal profits or gain, and embezzlement are still widespread. For many, public office is perceived not as a platform for service, but as an opportunity for personal or group gain. This perception reinforces the dangerous narrative of "it's my turn to eat," where power is used as a gateway to wealth accumulation, self-preservation, elevation of a given group, often at the expense of the public good or national interest. Corruption not only diverts resources away from development, but also weakens the morale of ethical public servants, creates unequal access to services, and undermines trust in governance. When positions of power are awarded based on personal or ethnic loyalty rather than merit and competence, public institutions become politicized and ineffective. Bribery and cronyism further alienate those without access to elite networks, making opportunity and justice privileges of the connected rather than the rights of all. Rent-seeking behavior, where public policy is manipulated for private or group gain, diverts vital national resources toward narrow interests, undermining development and widening inequality. Embezzlement robs communities of essential services, deepening public disillusionment and resentment. Perhaps most dangerously, these practices foster ethnic favoritism, where leaders prioritize the advancement of their group over the collective good. This fractures the social fabric, weakens national identity, and reinforces a toxic mindset of us versus them. The strategic displacement of capable individuals in favor of loyalists aligned with specific agendas further entrenches division, stifles reform, and erodes public trust. The phrase, "it's my turn to eat," captures this damaging cycle. A mentality that transforms leadership from a platform for service into a license for extraction. For Ethiopia to move forward, citizens, civil servants, and government leaders must reject this mindset and embrace a model of governance rooted in fairness, competence, and a shared national purpose. Only by doing so can we build a nation that serves all its people, across ethnic lines, regions, and generations. At the same time, it is essential to recognize the dedication of countless civil servants who work with integrity under challenging conditions. Many public employees continue to serve their communities with commitment and professionalism despite limited resources and systemic constraints. These individuals represent the foundation upon which reform efforts can be built. To move forward, comprehensive reforms are needed to professionalize the civil service, promote merit-based recruitment and promotion, improve accountability mechanisms, and empower institutions to operate transparently. Emphasis must also be placed on building a culture of public service, one where civil servants see themselves as stewards of the public good rather than beneficiaries of state power. Institutional integrity must be restored through systemic changes and a renewed ethical commitment to service and nation building. Ethiopia's political landscape is a key factor worthy of in-depth consideration. We're only scratching the surface here. Stay tuned for the next video on this topic. A complex history of centralized governance, revolutionary transformation, and ethnic federalism shapes Ethiopia's political landscape. While significant efforts have been made over the years to expand political inclusion, decentralize authority, and recognize the diversity of the Ethiopian people, the evolving nature of the country's political system continues to present formidable challenges to unity, democratic governance, and accountability. Introduced in the early 1990s, Ethiopia's ethnic federalist arrangement was envisioned as a framework to acknowledge and institutionalize the rights of Ethiopia's diverse ethnic groups. It was intended to promote self-determination, preserve cultural identity, and prevent the historical marginalization of peripheral communities. Ethnic federalism has empowered regional states and provided avenues for historically sidelined groups to assert political agency and claim resources. However, the system has also inadvertently fostered deep political fragmentation. The formalization of ethnicity as a basis for political organization has intensified identity-based competition and generated parallel forms of nationalism that often prioritize ethnic loyalty over national cohesion. Political elites frequently mobilize along ethnic lines to secure influence and resources, leading to exclusionary governance and, at times, violent conflict. This environment can encourage a zero-sum political mentality, where one group's gain is perceived as another's loss, eroding trust in state institutions and democratic processes. One significant outcome of ethnic federalism is indexing territories along ethnic lines. Regional states are demarcated geographically and ethnically, reinforcing exclusivist claims to land, resources, and political power. This territorialization of identity contributes to inter-ethnic tensions, contested borders, and periodic outbreaks of violence as communities compete for recognition, autonomy, or dominance within the federal system. Moreover, the ethnic indexing of territories has had a distorting effect on historical narratives and collective memory. Competing groups often reinterpret or selectively emphasize aspects of history to legitimize their territorial claims or political aspirations. This has led to politicizing historical facts, where history becomes a tool for justifying exclusion or entitlement, rather than a shared foundation for reconciliation and understanding. In some cases, long-standing intergroup relationships, marked by coexistence, trade, family ties, or alliance, are overshadowed or erased by divisive narratives rooted in ethnic exceptionalism. While ethnic federalism was initially intended to address historical marginalization and ensure representation for Ethiopia's diverse communities, its long-term impact has often been the institutionalization of division rather than inclusion. Instead of creating a shared national project, it has led to administrative structures that can mirror and magnify ethnic rivalries. This has made political negotiation difficult, fostered mistrust between groups, and challenged efforts to build a cohesive, inclusive Ethiopian identity. Addressing these challenges requires rethinking federalism through an ethical lens, one that promotes unity without erasing diversity values, inclusivity over exclusion, and ensures all citizens are protected equally, regardless of ethnic affiliation. Through such a transformation, Ethiopia can move beyond a politics of identity and toward a governance system rooted in shared values and collective progress. Consequently, the pursuit of political office is often framed less as a platform for service and more as a means to advance the interests of one's ethnic constituency. The result is a governance structure susceptible to patronage, favoritism, and the entrenchment of the "it's our turn to eat" mindset, where state resources are viewed as rewards distributed among insiders rather than tools to serve the broader public. Nonetheless, it is vital to acknowledge the resilience of Ethiopia's reform-minded citizens, leaders, journalists, activists, and civic groups who continue to advocate for democratic ideals under challenging conditions. Their efforts highlight the deep public yearning for a more open, just, and inclusive political system. For Ethiopia to transition toward a more stable, and democratic future, reforms must prioritize broadening political space, safeguarding civil liberties, and decoupling ethnicity from political entitlement. Political institutions must evolve to reward inclusive leadership and national vision over narrow group interest, ensuring that governance is seen not as a prize to be won, but as a responsibility to be fulfilled in service of all Ethiopians. At the same time, those in positions of authority may view their access to state resources as an opportunity for personal enrichment. For individuals who have waited years or generations for political or economic inclusion, holding office can be seen as their long overdue turn to eat. This mindset undermines public service ethics and reinforces corruption as a normalized, even expected behavior within institutions. Resource distribution in Ethiopia has increasingly become a politically sensitive and contested issue. While the federal government has sought to implement development programs to achieve regional equity, allocation decisions are often influenced by political loyalty, ethnic affiliation, or strategic calculations. Regions and communities perceived as aligned with ruling elites may receive preferential access to infrastructure investment, public services, or development funding, while others face marginalization. This politicization of resource allocation deepens existing inequalities, fuels grievances, and weakens trust in the government's ability to govern impartially. It also reinforces the perception that political access is the only viable economic advancement, further entrenching the "it's our turn to eat" logic in political and economic life. Importantly, promising efforts are underway to improve fiscal transparency, decentralize budgeting processes, and enhance inclusive development planning. If implemented consistently and equitably, these reforms can help reduce corruption and ensure that economic growth translates into broad-based improvements in living standards. Addressing Ethiopia's economic challenges requires more than growth alone. It demands policies that explicitly tackle inequality, ensure equitable access to opportunity, and instill a culture of integrity within both the public and private sectors. Only then can the country move beyond transactional politics toward a more just, accountable, and inclusive economic future. Normalization of corruption. In many parts of society, corruption is no longer seen as a deviation from the norm, but rather as an embedded feature of public life. From petty bribery to high-level embezzlement, corrupt practices are often viewed as unavoidable or expected steps in navigating bureaucratic systems or securing economic opportunity. This cultural normalization of corruption has created a dangerous environment of impunity, where wrongdoings go unpunished, ethical standards are compromised, and trust in institutions continues to erode. This state of affairs is not simply the result of moral decay, but often reflects a survivalist logic in a context of limited opportunity, widespread poverty, and institutional dysfunction. For some, engaging in corruption is the only way to access services or assert agency in a system rigged against them. For others, in positions of authority, exploiting power for personal gain becomes rationalized as a form of delayed justice, an entitlement after long-standing exclusion or sacrifice. However, this perceived need to reward oneself is often misguided and undermines public trust and institutional integrity. Prioritizing personal compensation over public service becomes detrimental to national development, perpetuating cycles of corruption, inequality, and division that ultimately hinder collective progress. In either case, the cumulative effect is weakening public morality and a governance culture perpetuating inequality and exclusion cycles. Confronting these challenges requires more than institutional reform. It demands a cultural transformation, a mindset change, and a paradigm shift. A shift must occur, both in leadership and in societal expectations, toward a model of governance defined by integrity, service, and collective responsibility focused on national interest. Ethical leadership is essential for restoring public trust and building resilient institutions. Leaders at all levels must be held to higher standards of accountability and transparency, not only through laws and policies but also through social norms that reward honesty and punish corruption. There is a notable movement by many individuals within Ethiopia, civil servants, community leaders, religious figures, activists, and youth, to exemplify integrity and selfless service. These actors must be uplifted and supported as role models in reshaping the national narrative around leadership and governance. Institutions of education, religious establishments, families, and the media all have a role to play in cultivating a culture where corruption is condemned and ethical behavior is the expected standard. The country must foster a political culture where leadership is viewed not as a pathway to personal gain, but as a solemn responsibility to serve the public good. In doing so, the nation can break free from the cycles of entitlement and impunity and chart a path toward a more just, unified, and accountable society. What are the lessons to be taken? The message behind It's My Turn to Eat is not merely a diagnosis of Kenya's governance challenges, but a roadmap for reform relevant to countries like Ethiopia. It provides critical takeaways for citizens and policymakers seeking to build more transparent, accountable, and inclusive political systems. As Ethiopia grapples with persistent challenges in governance, corruption, and political inclusion, shifting from diagnosis to action is imperative. A broad consensus is emerging among reformers, civil society actors, and the international community. Sustainable change requires systemic, coordinated interventions, prioritizing accountability, civic empowerment, and equitable development. Here are key actionable steps that Ethiopia can adopt to begin rebuilding trust in institutions, restoring public integrity, and strengthening the democratic fabric of the state. Reinforcing accountability in governance. One of the most powerful lessons is establishing robust accountability mechanisms. In the Ethiopian context, this means strengthening institutions that monitor public officials, creating channels for citizens to report abuses, and ensuring that corruption is consistently prosecuted regardless of political affiliation. Transparent budgeting, independent audit bodies, and empowered watchdog offices are crucial tools. Promoting unity over division. The message underscores the urgency of transcending ethnic partisanship in political leadership. Ethiopian society must encourage leaders to rise above ethnic allegiances and govern based on shared national interests. A deliberate effort to cultivate inclusive policies, equitable development, and interethnic dialogue can foster greater cohesion and weaken the logic of zero-sum politics. Empowering an active citizenry. Citizens must be more proactive in governance for meaningful change. The phrase, "It's my turn to eat," should serve as a rallying point for civic education campaigns, grassroots mobilization, and nonpartisan citizen oversight initiatives. Civil society organizations can amplify this message, helping the public recognize that sustained pressure from below is vital to reforming systems from above. Cultivating ethical leadership. Ethical governance begins with ethical leaders at all levels. There is a critical need to nurture a new generation of public servants who see leadership as a responsibility, not a reward. Educational and leadership development programs should emphasize public ethics, social justice, and servant leadership. Recognition and support for principled leaders must also become a cornerstone of political culture. The metaphor, "It's my turn to eat," can inspire a renewed commitment to civic participation. Ethiopians must be empowered and encouraged to hold their leaders accountable by voting and participating in public forums. Democracy cannot thrive without an engaged and vigilant citizenry. Introducing, enacting, and enforcing the laws that safeguard whistleblower protections to enable citizens and civil servants to report misconduct without fear of retaliation can empower citizens and individuals who hold high regard for civic duties and motivate others to refrain from crossing the professional line. Promote meritocracy. Ensure that recruitment, promotion, and retention in the public sector are based on competence, integrity, and performance. Moving away from practices rooted in political favoritism, ethnic bias, or personal connections is essential to building a professional and effective civil service. Encourage cross-ethnic political coalitions. Support the formation of inclusive political platforms that transcend ethnic lines and prioritize shared national interests. Institutionalize a code of ethics. Mandate all public officials to adopt and adhere to a national code of conduct with clear penalties for violations. Recognition of ethical leaders. Publicly acknowledge and reward individuals in public service who demonstrate exemplary integrity, creating role models for future leaders. Strengthening the rule of law. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen done. Restoring confidence in the legal system is critical. The role of the citizenry, a cornerstone of accountability and reform. While governments, institutions, and international actors play critical roles in the fight against corruption, lasting and meaningful change cannot occur without the active involvement of citizens. In any democratic society, particularly one striving to overcome a legacy of corruption and mistrust, the citizenry must be recognized not as passive observers but as active participants in governance. In Ethiopia, where political, social, and economic challenges intersect with historical grievances, the people's power to demand integrity and accountability is more crucial than ever. When citizens are engaged, informed, and united, they form the most formidable safeguard against corruption. To wrap things up, here's a vision. The metaphor. "It's my turn to eat" is not merely a commentary on individual greed. It reflects systemic flaws that perpetuate inequality, division, and underdevelopment. Tackling these challenges demands comprehensive education, governance, and civic engagement reforms. Ethiopia can only move beyond the politics of entitlement through a collective commitment to transparency, equity, and ethical leadership, and build a more inclusive and accountable state. Establishing an effective public administration system and a credible independent ethics body in Ethiopia is a formidable challenge, but it is also urgent and necessary. The path forward will be neither easy nor linear. Building a lasting system will require courage, collaboration, and patience. History shows that reform is possible. When political will aligns with citizen demand, when institutions are empowered and trusted, and when a society redefines what it values in leadership, transformation follows. This is Ethiopia's opportunity to break free from the entrenched culture of entitlement and build a governance model based on national interest, public service, integrity, and accountability. With persistent effort and a shared vision, the idea that power belongs to the people, not for profit but for progress, can become more than an aspiration. It can become the new foundation of the Ethiopian state. Change begins with collective action. When the people rise to the challenge, even the most entrenched systems can be reformed. A national call to action. Together for integrity. A call to serve, not to self. Ethiopia stands at a pivotal crossroads in the face of systemic corruption, political exclusion, and public disillusionment. The phrase, "It's my turn to eat," has come to symbolize more than just greed. It encapsulates a governance culture where personal gain, whether individual interest or ethnic-based bias, is too often prioritized over national interest and public service. A new message must sound across all corners of Ethiopia, a unifying call that speaks to both the government and the governed. Together for integrity, a call to serve, not to self, is a call for national interest and not dominance. Ethiopia's national interest is the responsibility and obligation of every man, woman, young and old. A powerful new message must emerge, a unifying call to both the government and the governed. Together for integrity, a call to serve, not to self. It calls for putting national interest above personal gain and shared purpose above dominance. Together for integrity, a call to serve, not to self. Integrity must become the national language, and civic service must be the collective mission. This is more than a slogan. It is a movement, a vision for national transformation built on shared responsibility, ethical leadership, and collective action. Every Ethiopian has a role in building a system that serves the public good. Leaders must be held accountable for their actions, and citizens should expect transparency in governance. Together, the people of Ethiopia can create a culture where ethical behavior is the norm. It's time to move beyond the mentality of "it's my turn to eat." True leadership is about serving the people, not enriching oneself. Ethiopia must work toward a system where service and integrity prevail. An informed citizenry is our best defense against corruption. The people of Ethiopia must take time to educate themselves and others about rights and responsibilities in governance. The people of Ethiopia must say no in unison to corrosion, collision, and self-interest over the national interest. When voices unite, so will actions, which can create a powerful force for change that demands better governance for self and systems. The message, "Together for Integrity, a call to serve, not to self," is more than a campaign. It is the blueprint for a renewed commitment to stand against divisive rhetoric and over-domineering agenda and shift toward a stance that will not compromise self and the country's integrity. It calls on all to replace resignation with action, apathy with purpose, and division with unity. The focus must shift from political and ethnic supremacy to collective progress by fostering a culture of integrity and accountability. Leaders can be inspired to uphold the public trust, and citizens can be empowered to demand justice and transparency at every level. A call to serve, not to self, is not just a slogan, it is a mission, it is a moral revolt, it is the future Ethiopia deserves. That's it for today from Independent Voice, where truth speaks louder than power. Let this be our reminder. Real change begins when we choose service over self, integrity over impunity, and unity over division. If this message resonates with you, share it and help build a more accountable, ethical Ethiopia. We're here every Wednesday, bringing fearless insights that challenge, inspire, and empower. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and always speak with an independent voice. Remember, use your voice to make a difference and not to silence others.